Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Applying Economic and Market-Based Instruments for Water Resource Management. My name is Isao Endo. I am Environment Specialist at the Environment Thematic Group at SDCC. I would like to serve as the moderator. This is the third webinar of our knowledge series, Sustainable Financing for Nature-Positive Investments, Tools for Integrating Economic and Market-Based Instruments into Projects. It aims to raise awareness and build a case to use and scale up market-based economic instruments, or MBIs. Today's webinar will present trends for implementing MBIs for water quality and resource management, discuss recommendations for scaling up application, and explore needs, challenges, and opportunities for reforms and support through ADB's operations. Before I start, I have a few housekeeping announcements. Please note that this meeting is recorded. Please stay on mute unless you speak. Please turn off your microphone after speaking. Please raise your hand or use the chat box to raise questions. Here's the agenda. Firstly, we have the presentation on the trends and opportunities for using MBIs for water resource management in Asia. Then we have the panel discussion where we present good practices and case studies. After that, we have the Q&A and discussion session with all the participants. Now, let me start the first presentation session by inviting Professor Pong Kam Nam. Professor Nam is the Dean of the School of Economics at University of Economics, Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. He also serves as the Director of the Economy and Environment Partnership for Southeast Asia, as well as the Environment for Development Center in Vietnam. Professor Nam presents the findings of the water chapter of our recent publication, Greening Markets, Market-Based Approaches for Environmental Management in Asia. He will highlight MBIs with the strongest potential for scaling up in the region and the needed enabling conditions and considerations for successful implementation. Professor Nam, over to you.
Thank you, Isao. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Mr. Isao Endo and ADB for organizing this webinar and giving me a chance to share the research results from Chapter 3, Market-Based Approaches for Water Management in Asia in the Greening Markets report that ADB just released. Let me share my presentation. Do you see that? Yeah, I would like to acknowledge important contribution by my co-authors, Dale Whittington from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Suwin Wu Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. So before going to the report, I would like to share with you a story related to the Vietnamese environmental law. The new law of environmental protection was passed by the National Assembly of Vietnam in November 2020, just last year, and will come into full effect in January next year, 2022. And you know, there was a transformation in the approaches to environmental management in the new law. As you can see, in the old law, the key and dominant approach can be seen in Chapter 11 on regulation and standards. Only one very short article mentioned the environmental protection fee that applies mainly for wastewater. And notice that this was a fee, not a tax. But in the new law, beside the chapter for regulation and standards, a completely new chapter for market-based instrument was added. And you can see the full list of instruments mentioned in the new law. In November 2018, about more than 2 years ago, the first draft of this greening markets report was presented at the Policy Day, co-organized by EFD, ADB, and ISPONRE. ISPONRE is the research institute belong to Ministry of Environment, who was in charge of preparing the new law. So we see the connection between this ADB's report and the new chapter on market-based instrument of the new environmental law in Vietnam. So let me have a quick overview of the market-based instrument for environmental management. You know, first we have the tools that have been widely used in developing countries that use the power of state to manage environment. We call this tool is command and control. And as you can see, it might include environmental regulation, standards, or national parks. And people are allowed to discharge to a certain level. So if exceeding the level, your factory will be fined or shut down. The second group of tools based on the power of market, that is market-based instrument. So resource using behaviors, for example, or discharging behaviors are now directed by monetary incentives. And we have, if you discharge more, you pay more. So in that case, what should the factory owners do? So in the third group of instrument, that is use the power of crowd, the power of society. We call it civil society. It includes behavioral nudge, include voluntary actions such as information provision, green labels, ISO boycotts, or environmental campaigns from the mass. So among the three group of instruments here, the first one, the one using the power of the state, bear the very high social cost. The second one, the market one, is cost effective and it encourages innovation. But the third one is quite cheap, not stable, but it's new and potentially have a big impact. So in the report, we first we do the stock taking of relevant policy in the developing member countries, and we also collect great literatures from the water resources. And secondly, we conducted the systematic review of peer reviewer journal articles linking policy tools to application published in a recognized international scientific journal. So with all the literature in hand, we identify key application in water management. We also identify the economic tools, the market-based instrument available for policymakers in the member countries, and then we analyze findings, case studies, and finally we did the validation through various workshops and peer review. So let me spend several minutes providing some backgrounds of water resources in Asia. So in this slide, you see that per capita renewable fresh water resources in Asia are among the lowest in the world, perhaps due to Asia is the most populous region. Among countries in the area of studies, Cambodia, Laos, Pakistan, Nepal, and Vietnam have the highest percentage of water withdrawal. We are talking about water withdrawal by sector here, devoted to agriculture, which cover like 90% of the water resources. Over 40% of water withdrawals in Malaysia, in Mongolia, are for industrial use. In India, we have 9%, China 19% have the highest water allocation for municipal use, domestic water. If you see what this figure, one measure of the water stress is the fresh water withdrawals as a percentage of the total renewable water resources. And by that measure, you see the Pakistan on the right-hand side is by far the most water stressed country in the region, with the water withdrawals of about 75% of total renewable water resources. You know, high water withdrawals is leading to water stress in many Asian countries. We also see the increasing water pollution from different sectors, household, industrial, agricultural activities, also a major issues for nearly all developing Asian countries. You see on the left-hand side, China has the highest level of reported BOD emissions, about almost 9 million kilograms per day. Most of the countries reported significant growth in BOD emissions accompanying their economic growth too. So on the right-hand side, you see many developing Asian countries have very little wastewater treatment, almost zero, as you can see here. So that's the situation with the water pollution. So we can say that poor surface water quality has become a very serious environmental and public health issues in developing Asian countries. So in this table, you see it is the overview of the MBIs for water management in Asia. We identify 4 water issues in Asia. That is the inefficient use of irrigation water, the poor inter-sectoral water allocation, the surface water pollution, and failure to protect and value ecosystem. On the other side, we identify from the literature review, we identify the different market-based policy instrument used for in ASEAN. In the next 4 slides, I am discussing in more detail about the performance of the MBIs in the 4 water sectors. So let me go directly to the first one, the irrigation water, agricultural water. Now, you know, the water prices faced by farmers in Asia, we found that very extremely low, and most public irrigation schemes in Asia are heavily subsidized, and the area-based pricings was widely used in Asia, in many countries in Asia. And this instrument require little information and regulation. So the area-based pricing lead to the fact that the productivity of water is low and inefficient. Another option for water irrigation, water management is the volumetric pricing as an MBI that can be used to tackle inefficient use of irrigation water, as you see in the area-based pricing, by charging farmers for the amount of irrigation water consumed and or delivered. So, however, implementation costs of these volumetric pricings are relatively high, and studies we review show that in both China and India, we found that volumetric water fees lead to an increase in efficiency. That one side. On the other side, we also shift to high value and less water intensive crops when they apply volumetric pricings. But in general, many studies on the performance of water pricings in Asia, especially in China and in India, found mixed results. A sufficient increase of water fee can increase water efficiency, of course. But when it is paired with subsidies, it mitigated farmer income losses from the increase in the water price. However, it requires political feasibility. For example, issues related to equity concerns or adverse distributional impacts. And we know that several studies found pricing the use of surface water can lead to the increase in the usage of groundwater. On the other hand, so the use of irrigation can involve significant energy use for pumping. So the strong link between the irrigation and both energy use and water depletion suggests that a pricing mechanism could be applied to electricity and water. So this is a lesson we learned from irrigation water. For the inter-sectoral and inter-regional water allocation, we know that agricultural agriculture is often not the highest use value of water at the margin. We can transfer water from agriculture to increase urban water supply or for industrial uses. The question is, what mechanism work in this case? The transfer can occur through formal administrative decision with negotiation and compensation, or through water markets. So let us talk about the MBI here, the market-based instrument, the water markets that can transfer rights to higher value uses. Studies show that the limited number of market transactions were due to a number of barriers, for example, unclear legal foundation, high transaction costs, insufficient of incentive for water saving and trading, and lastly, corruption limit the water market. Water markets also have equity implication for smallholders and others who may be unable to compete in the market. We see that compensation can ease the intersectoral reallocation process too. However, we see that several studies found that the water market reforms have had the negative distributive impacts too. So there are two key enabling conditions for functional markets for the intersectoral water allocation. First one is there must exist well-defined, quantifiable, transferable property rights. Establishing this condition was seen as a key challenge in China. Furthermore, in defining the property rights, there may need to be unbundling or an account for water flows. For example, in China, although there are mandates to conserve enough water for ecosystem uses, but it is unclear who is responsible for this work. That's the situation with the water market for water allocation. Moving to the surface water pollution, we see that water pollution is a very classic environmental issue, and there is a very rich body of work in both at global level or Asian context. Here, the use of effluent charge taxes to put a price on pollution discharge. Effluent charge are used to control water pollution in Asia widely, Malaysia, the Philippines, China, and Thailand. So in general, we observe that the performance of effluent charges due to the lack of information on cost of pollution abatement technology and the damage caused from pollution. So pollution fees are frequently set very low, and besides, enforcement is very often very poor. So studies found mixed results here on the efficiency of the instrument, the effluent charge in Asia. So after my presentation, we have an opportunity to see a case study of the discharge fees used in Laguna Lake in the Philippines. For the water pollution in agriculture, we have the nutrient tax. Agricultural pollution are dispersed and difficult to identify. So therefore, raising complex policy issues, nutrient taxes can be used to reduce pollution. This is a lesson that we learn from literature globally. However, rather than taxing fertilizer to address the runoff problem, many Asian developing countries subsidize fertilizer prices to keep costs down for farmers. So this is the case that we observe for India, Indonesia, China, and Sri Lanka. So this MBI is potentially good for Asia, but we have not applied that yet. Another MBI, that is information disclosure. The most well-known application of this MBI is the proper program in Indonesia. So the condition that we need for successfully adopt this instrument is a strong regulatory capacity and strong public support. A lesson learned is that information disclosure instrument might create incentives for adopting the environmentally responsible practices. And we see later. And another instrument for water pollution is the tradable discharge permit. In the system of tradable discharge permits, the authority sets the maximum amount of emissions for a particular ecosystem. Then the total amount of emission is divided into a fixed number of permits. And then after the initial allocation, for example, through auctions or the bus level of discharge, so the holders can be allowed trade their permits in the secondary market. That is how tradable discharge permit work. And we observe that in 2008, China have selected 7 provinces to pilot water pollution trading programs. The water emission trading later did not spread in China. They couldn't scale up that tradable permit in China. So the lesson learned from this pilot in China is that the information requirements and the regulatory complexities can discourage governments and firms from establishing tradable discharge permits markets for water pollution. So the permit systems require a very strong regulatory framework and monitoring infrastructure to be effective. The last sector is the ecosystem values. We know that the payment for ecosystem services have been implemented in a number of countries in Asia, including China, India, several Southeast Asian, with varying levels of success. We also see a similar instrument, the eco compensation program in China, that include a broad range of approaches that account for the cost of environmental goods, services, rewards, ecosystem protection, compensate for environmental damage, or impose polluter charges. So experience in the region demonstrate that promising a result for environmental performance of this instrument. But you know, besides the positive environmental impacts, there are still gaps in terms of social gains. And many studies reviewing the PES schemes implemented in 6 Asian countries found that while they deliver higher levels of environmental impact, they did not perform as well in supporting equity, participation, or livelihoods. You know, several other lessons learned. We need huge amount of information, especially well-informed valuation study of ecosystem services, as well as the information from buyers and sellers. On political feasibility, we need public support, but we need to persuade buyers to voluntarily participate. And there are still many questions about the cost effectiveness of the BES, since we observe that high transaction cost in this for this instrument. And let me go to the conclusion and discuss some low-hanging fruits. We have 2 key conclusions. First, when properly designed and implemented, MBIs can be cost-effective tools to promote efficient water use and reduce water pollution. Second, in practice, the MBIs in the water sector in Asia have often suffered from poor design, implementation, and monitoring and enforcement. So, we have 3 low-hanging fruit to discuss here. First, for the water use, behavioral nudges can complement the MBIs to influence the decision-making on water use. New directions for the application of the MBIs and the flexible policy instrument, this is to address the water challenges in Asia, might include the behavioral nudge here. And we know that the behavioral nudge use psychological intervention or a change in choice structure to influence the behavior and decision making of the water user. And we can learn from others, as you can see here, behavioral tools such as social information messages information provision on water quality, combination of technical information, moral persuasion, social comparison, social norms, education campaigns, all the tools in nudge, all the nudge here, we can learn from experience from our water sector around the world. For water pollution, to address the water pollution problem, we argue that we can set up a hybrid policy of information provision and effluent charges. Combining them, effluent charges provide polluters continuous incentive to innovate. We can see from the theory, and to find the least cost pollution abatement options. And information provision can eliminate information asymmetries between polluters and the public, as well as increase the political pressure on industries to abate. Another recommendation, I admit, this is not a low-hanging fruit, is that to successfully implement MBIs for water pollution, we need to create and define property rights. This is not easy. There are several challenges. First, we need property rights must be defined simply and clearly enough to be easily traded in the market. Secondly, property rights must also align with existing institutional and legal frameworks. The nature of the property rights will depend on the characteristic of the goods and services and the proposed market structures. And property rights must be accounted for the variable nature of water availability too. So too many challenges. But for the successful application of the MBI, we need property right to be defined. And finally, for the payment for ecosystem services, for the ecosystem value, we see that a scaling up PES can be done, but under the right conditions. So there are a number of enabling conditions that require to scale up the PES successfully, including the political support, sustainable financing, lean institutional setup, including the cross-sectional coordination across government agency, effective tools and system, clearly demonstrated impact, and finally the flexibility to adapt to different conditions across target ecosystem and community. So these slides bring me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Nam, for your presentation. That was very helpful. In fact, that was really encouraging as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, I do have a, can you hear me? Okay, good. Thank you. Your information about the current use of MBIs in the region is very informative. I noticed those include water pricing, water markets, effluent charges with information disclosure, and also PES. Thank you very much. Also, your recommendation of promising MBIs or low-hanging fruit is really helpful. We noted that these include behavior nudges, effluent charges, and information provision again. This gives a very good basis for advancing the application and upscaling of MBIs. Thank you. Now, let us move to the panel discussion. We have invited the 3 panelists. Engineer Joe Staana, Division Chief, Environmental Laboratory and Research Division, Lake Laguna Development Authority. Mr. Phong Hang Lung, Director, Chat Nam National Park, Vietnam. And Dr. Ayu Xion, Senior Water Resource Specialist, ADB. Let me briefly introduce each panelist. Engineer Joe is the chemical engineer with a master's degree in environmental engineering. She started her work at the pollution control section at the Laguna Lake Development Authority and was the head of the section when the environmental user fee system was implemented. Currently, she's the division chief of the Environmental Laboratory and Research Division, which undertakes laboratory analysis of samples collected from the industrial and commercial establishments. Mr. Phong Han Long is the director of Chat Tien National Park under the Vietnam Administration of Forestry, or VN Forest. Before that, he was the director of Planning and Finance Department, VN Forest, the deputy director of the Trust Funds for Forests in Vietnam, and the deputy director of the Vietnam Forest Protection and Development Fund. He was responsible for formulating, both formulating and implementing the policy on payment for forest environmental services in Vietnam. Dr. Ayu Sion Yi. Sion is the Senior Water Resource Specialist with ADB's East Asia Department. He's responsible for leading design, processing, and implementing of loans and technical assistance projects. Prior to this, he worked on a range of strategic water policy and planning roles, including designing and evaluating national market-based instrument programs in Australia. He has a PhD in resource economics from Central Queensland University and civil engineering and business management from the University of Queensland. Firstly, let me invite Engineer Joe. Engineer Joe, can you tell us about the experience in implementing the environmental user fee system in Laguna Lake, Philippines? What can we learn about the challenges and successes and success factors in its implementation? Engineer Joe, over to you.
Okay, good afternoon to everyone. So let me first share my slides. So can you see it now?
Yes, we can, Ma'am Joe.
So for today, I will present the environmental user fee system in the Laguna De Bay Basin. So wait, I'll just have to have it in slideshow. Where's that? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm having some technical problems on having it on slideshow. But anyway, so the Laguna De Bay Basin, Laguna De Bay, or commonly known as Laguna Lake, is the largest freshwater lake in the Philippines and one of the largest lakes in the Southeast Asia. The lake is a multiple use resource with fisheries as the dominant use of the lake. In the late 1990s, the Laguna de Bay was identified as a source of domestic water supply. Way back then, there was already a rapid industrialization and urbanization around the lake. And so it was deemed necessary to take more steps on environmental management control. The LLDA is the agency mandated to implement sustainable development within the region. And under the charter of the LLDA, the board of directors, which is the policy-making body of the agency, can issue and implement policies such as those on market-based instruments. The goal of the system was to enhance the environmental quality of the lake by providing industrial firms with incentive to reduce pollution and to use the fish for environmental management control. And so in January 1997, the environmental user fee system was implemented in the Laguna De Bay region. This applies the polluters pay principle, wherein the industries are required to pay for every unit of pollution that they discharge into the water bodies. And this system encourages dischargers to internalize the cost of environmental degradation and enhancement into their business decisions and actions. I would like to emphasize that this system is not a license to pollute. The environmental user fee system was implemented together with the command and control process. So if there's continuing non-compliance from the industries, pollution cases can be filed against them, and even to the point of issuing cease and desist orders. The EUFS was adopted in the Clean Water Act of 2004 as the wastewater charge system for implementation nationwide. So for the coverage, on the first year, the top polluters were included in the system, and these are the food processing firms, the piggeries and slaughterhouses, the beverage manufacturers, textile industries, and the pulp and paper mills. On the second year, all industries that generate processed wastewater were included. And on the third year, up to the present, residential subdivisions and commercial establishments, including food chains and restaurants, are now covered by the system. The total user's fee is composed of the fixed fee and the variable fee. The fixed fee covers the administrative cost, and this is based on the volume of discharge from industries. So the higher the discharge, the higher is the amount to be paid. On the other hand, the variable fee is based on the compliance with the effluent standards. So for BOD, the effluent standard is set at 50 milligram per liter. So for complying industries, they have to pay only 5 pesos per kilogram of total BOD, while those non-complying, they have to pay 30 pesos per kilogram of total BOD. So all industries under the system are required to apply for a discharge permit, which is the legal authorization for an establishment to discharge their effluent. And the LLDA recognized those industries in good standing by issuing them long-term discharge permit of up to 3 years, and then revalidation is just necessary on an annual basis. So this graph shows the number of industries covered by the system and the number of discharge permit issued. So we can see from here that there's an increasing trend, which is a proof of the increasing compliance among industries. However, in 2017, there was a memorandum circular issued that those industries located within industrial estates and those that discharge into the sewerage system of the concessionaires are no longer required to apply for discharge permit. So there was a drop during this year. But this doesn't mean that the coverage is decreased. The coverage is still the same. It's just that the discharge permit is no longer required for some industries. The next slide shows the reduction in the average BOD loading from the covered industries. So the left axis corresponds to the number of firms and the total BOD loading, while the right axis corresponds to the average BOD and the median BOD from industries. So from 1997 to 1999, there was a abrupt decrease, and then the average BOD is maintained on a low level. So the reduction in BOD is due to several factors. One is the increased efforts from the sources to treat their wastewater, and then some industries implemented wastewater recycling activities, waste minimization, and even conversion from wet to dry process. Unfortunately, there was also voluntary closure or relocation. So now for the issues and challenges, especially on the initial stages of the system, some industries dilute their wastewater in order to lower the concentration and to lower the amount of variable fee that they have to pay. And another issue is that industries find it more expensive to operate within the Laguna De Bay region compared to their competitors operating in other areas. However, as the system was implemented over the years, these industries realize the importance of environmental protection, and some of them are now our partners in implementing programs and projects for the protection of the lake. The last one is that we find that BOD is not applicable for all industries, especially the metal processing industries, the inorganic chemical manufacturers. And so for this type of industries, we use total suspended solids instead of BOD. For this year, there's a study to be conducted to review and update the coverage and the fees being implemented under the user fee system. And we hope that through this, the results of this study, we can further improve the system and further implement more environmental measures in the lake. So with that, thank you very much. And you may visit our website at www.llda.gov.ph for more information about the LLDA and the Laguna de Bay region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Engineer Joe, for your intervention. The application of user fee system in Laguna Lake is very encouraging. We understood that the reduction in BOD loading was very a good result. I think we can learn a lot from this successful example. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Long. Mr. Long, can you tell us about the experience in implementing the payments for forest ecosystem services scheme in Vietnam? What can we learn about the challenges and success factors in its implementation? Due to the time constraint, I would appreciate Mr. Lorne, if you could give your intervention within 10 minutes. Thank you. Mr. Lorne, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Isao, Endo, and ADB for inviting me joining this webinar. So, could you see? Could you see my presentation? Could you see?
Yes, but yeah, it's coming. Yes.
Yes. So to answer your question and requirement, I will give you an overview of policy. You know that in 2008, with the support from some international cooperation project, then we advise our Prime Minister to issue decision to pilot in 2 provinces, one in the north and one in the south. Beyond that, in 2010, we formulate and institutionalize, issue the decree 99 to apply in the whole country. And then we started all provinces in our country from 2011 up to now. So you can see that is a structure, the payment for environmental services. Now, on the left-hand side, you can see some provider as a forest owner, including organization and community and household, etc. In the middle, you can see some services provided by PFAS provider. And on the right-hand side, you can see the PFAS user as a hydropower plant, water supplier, and industrial manufacturer, and carbon sequestration facility, and aquaculture. So to implement that policy, if we not establish the fund, it's very difficult, because you know that PFAS provider, we have the 100 provider, so they cannot sign a contract directly with the PFAS user. So we formulate at the central, the VNFF at the provinces. We call that forest provincial fund, and we receive money from PFAS user to pay for forest owner, including household, community, company, etc. So during implementation, we draw some big impact, including policy. We formulate legal framework, not only in the decree, but also in the forestry law. So this is the law, the first law mentioned about the PFAS, and we also guide through some decree and decision and circular. And to support that, we, through some project, develop some technical manual and financial manual and some application software for implementing. Of course, and we set up the fund from the central to provinces. Right now, we have the 45 provincial fund. So for economic impact, we receive around 700 million US dollars right now, equivalent 70 million annually. At the central level, the central fund, they receive nearly 70%, and the rest amount belong to provincial fund. And we estimate the PFAS revenue account for 18.5% comparing with the total investment in our sector. And majority of the revenue comes from a hydropower plant. It is 96%. To do that, we have to sign the contract with the service user, and more than 1,100 contract was signed during the time And thankful for that. And after receiving PFAT money, we pay for forest owner. So the area, the forest area would pay account for 45%, and it increased year by year. You can see that in 2011, only 1.4 million hectare, but right now it is 6.8 million hectare. So thanks for PFAT revenue, it helped us to reduce forest violation. You can see cases reduced to 2018 only 46,000 cases, and second thing, it helped us to reduce forest losses. So you can see some figure on the table, and PFAT revenue also cover and help to increase forest coverage. So in 2014, only 40.4%, and right now it is 42%, comparing with all of land area in our country. So for social impact, we, after receiving money, we paid for forest owner. They receive around 60 million US dollar, and also household and entity who sign a contract for forest protection and management, they also receive around 150 million US dollar. So from implementation of PFAT, we draw some lessons learned. The first thing, we thank for political will, because from national and provincial level, they support very strongly. And of course, by doing that, we formulate the framework and some policy, and also we add in the law, and year by year it can adjust it and revise. For example, in 2017 we formulate in the law with some new article and a new rate to ensure that the rate payment can be covered for the labor costs. And of course, we think that without the scientific evidence, we cannot convince all stakeholders to submit our government and our assembly to approve for that policy. And of course, before that, we encourage and mobilize all stakeholders who involved to get the consensus. And of course, to do that, we conducted many training courses and communication and awareness raising. And during the time we implementing policy, we set up the M&E system, and we share information transparently. And of course, you can see that at the central level, we established the central fund as a VNFF. At the provincial level, we established the provincial fund. So that means we decentralize for locality to implement strongly. During the time, we still facing with some difficulty and challenges. You know that right now only some services apply, but some other it's very difficult, especially in the context of COVID, such as the carbon sequestration, or we can call the short abbreviation as CPFAT. Right now, we are trying to convince the government for piloting in some provinces. And of course, the rate of payment between watershed and some provinces, it's not very fair and sometimes there are differences from these provinces to other provinces. And even we now adjust the rate of payment, but comparing with the labor cost, it's still low, while opportunity cost quite high. So, for example, if in the north of our country, they only have 2 or 3 hectares, then the rate of payment only $40 per hectare. So the total revenue for them is not very good enough. And of course, to monitor and evaluate services quality is very difficult. For example, some people ask us about what about the water quality. So to measure that, it is not only a technical issue, but it is a financial issue to measure. And of course, we need to improve efficiency of using PFAS, because some community receive PFAS, but how to improve their livelihood. So we need to have some guidance or support to formulate to ensure that the livelihood can be improved. And of course, how to integrate PFAS with other policy, especially at the central level and also at the provincial level, because we not only based on that policy only, we need to cover all. So we anticipate that we still have some opportunity to doing better, because you know that sustainable forest management is a stream change in the world, especially in our law and our strategy. It allows us to measure and to do that. And to do PFAS policy, we need high consensus and a lot of support from authority and local people. I said, without their support, then we cannot implement successfully. And also PFAS as a sustainable financial instrument in our sector, we add not only in our law, but also in our strategy. And PFAS, for PFAS in carbon sequestration, we should pilot. But right now, we signed a contract with the World Bank through emission reduction project. It is a very potentially implement in the next 5 years. And of course, cooperation to promote efficiency improvement, PFAS, very, very potential. Right now, USA, they commit to support it to study more, especially I said for CPFAS.
Mr. Lon, excuse me, Mr. Lon. I would appreciate if you can wrap up very soon.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I think that the PFAS policy is very important for us, because the forest owner, if they receive less amount, then they can not try to protect and develop our forests. So PFAS is our life, and to encourage the forest owner to protect and develop forest in the future. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Lon, for your great presentation, presenting the case in Vietnam. PFAS is another successful practice. We observed good results of this innovative scheme that is very informative and encouraging, in fact, at the same time. Thank you. Now, let me invite Xion. Xion, for you, what we would like to know what can we learn from ADB's experiences so far with projects supporting MBIs for water resource management in East Asia. What are the opportunities for scaling up these approaches in ADB's operations? Again, because of the time constraint, Xion, I would appreciate it if you can sort of present within 10 minutes. Thank you for your understanding. Xion, it's over to you.
Thanks, Isao. Thanks, everyone. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So thanks everybody. Welcome, and thank you for having me at this webinar. I'll quickly just take you through a few slides here, as Professor Pham also touched on eco-compensation and PRC. And in the East Asia department, we've been supporting the PRC's program on eco-compensation as part of the broader, project and TA pipeline in China for a good many years. In fact, ADB has supported the eco-compensation program in the PRC since 2008. So it's been a long process, and sorry, I think it's 2009. 2009. So we've been supporting the government in trying to develop this mechanism, understanding how eco-compensation as a pseudo MBI, I say pseudo because it's not fully an MBI, but it's a form of payment for ecosystem services. And of course, MBIs are, as we've heard so far, are no panacea for solving environmental problems due to the classic public goods dilemma and market failure. But what we've seen with eco-compensation is it does hold some promise. It's starting to address some of these incentives that plague a lot of these issues with regards to public goods. Property rights is one of the main ones, and also policy and institutional frameworks to support it. And as on this slide here, it just outlines some of the challenges that we face in our typical projects in the environment and natural resources and agriculture arena that we support in the PRC. Typically, eco-compensation or ecological compensation, it's really focusing around water quality for the main. Rivers typically, I know they present provincial boundaries, and within China, a lot of these provinces are as big as many countries in terms of population, in terms of the landscape scale, and the types of issues that are being faced in terms of natural resources dilemmas. So really, we need to have a mechanism that can crowd in cooperation between different provinces. So here we talk about trans-provincial or cross-provincial coordination. We've got multiple agencies usually involved. There's financing gaps, and it really comes down to these incentives that we've heard about today. So what is eco-compensation? It's a type of transfer payment, essentially. It's a mechanism where the central government transfers payments on finances to usually provinces, and at the provincial level, they can even take that down to counties and municipalities. But essentially, it's a financial incentive payment. And what it tries to do is it tries to encompass a way to share co-benefits. So we're talking usually in terms of rivers and upstream, downstream communities, and I guess cities in many respects. We're trying to see how we can share the wealth. So upstream communities are typically the stewards or the managers of environmental assets that yield highly valuable or valued ecosystem services. And so downstream provinces typically are the beneficiaries. So usually the downstream areas benefit from clean water, better water quality. So what eco-compensation tries to do is provide a mechanism to share the cost of this market failure. So eco-compensation has been a big part of our program. We have a Yangtze River Economic Belt, and we've also got the Yellow River Ecological Corridor program at the moment. And within this program and pipeline of projects, we have included pilot initiatives where we have eco-compensation components that are being tested and trialed. And by no means is it a perfect mechanism, But certainly they've identified through our work and through working with the PRC agencies, there are promising aspects of it. So if I can move to the next one here. So this is a graphic that just quickly shows you what we're talking about here, as I mentioned earlier. So we've got downstream areas, you know, compensating, being compensated or compensating in most respects the upstream communities. So in terms of this is the way to balance the development of the interests. So the downstream communities typically have benefited from development, and so in so doing have degraded the environment. And so upstream communities, and usually these are the poorer provinces or poorer areas, they feel that, look, why are they missing out? Because the downstream communities have had chances to develop, but what about them? Now they've been told to restrict development, to protect the environment. So eco-compensation provides a way where payments can be provided to compensate for these, I guess, lost development opportunities. And one of the most important aspects of this in the Chinese context is that the central government plays a critical role. They play a facilitator role, they play a convener role, and of course they are the financiers. And usually in eco-compensation space, they are the sole financiers. And I'll just quickly move to a case study that is probably the first one that we've kicked off in our program on the YREB. Is this Sinan River, which is a river that runs between Anhui province and Zhejiang province. So these are two provinces towards the lower Yangtze. This graphic here that you can see on the right is complicated, but basically what it's saying is the two provinces have a water quality metric that they are agreeing on as part of negotiations for these this eco-compensation agreement between them. And they'll identify a reach of river system where they will identify the parameters for water quality. And if they meet that parameter, then the downstream province, in this case, pays $16 million a year to the upstream province. But an interesting aspect of eco-compensation is it works both ways. If the water quality target is not met, so if the agreed metric at the agreed testing points on the river is not met, in fact, the upstream province will pay the downstream province to defray the extra cost of water treatment to achieve their water quality or river or drinking water quality targets. So it's quite a dynamic mechanism, and it's a very interesting idea. It is still being tested. In fact, we've got a few TAs that are supporting this mechanism, to trial this mechanism and pilot it in many other pilot counties across the PRC. So by no means is this something that is I guess a silver bullet, but they're trying to figure out ways, and ADB is supporting the Chinese government to try to find ways to improve this mechanism, because we see a lot of promise. Now, on this case study between Anhui and Huangshan, just this bit of a snapshot here to give you background. They're trying to achieve some economic and environmental improvements. Outputs include improvements to urban and rural point source pollution, non-point source pollution control, improving agricultural and farming practices. There's also an interesting innovation in green financing that we introduced, and the next slide will capture this a bit better. Capacity for ecological system project management and strengthened. So it's a $100 million loan from ADB with an equivalent counterpart matching of funds. And the next slide here is the interesting one. So the green financing mechanism that was designed in this project, it's an interesting one in the sense that we have a bit of a dual pooled funding arrangement. So really it comes down to these incentives that I flagged earlier. So a green investment fund has been set up under the loan. So it's co-financed by the German KfW. And the investment fund, essentially, we've got a third-party investor. So there's a third-party company that will invest in green businesses. There's a set criteria, and there'll be a commercial basis for this, and the idea is to support green development. So it's almost like a way to catalyze green development in this municipality. The other part of the green finance mechanism is this incentive fund, and this is really the grassroots behavioral change aspect that we heard from Professor Pham in terms of behavioral nudges. Really, these are grants to farmers, smallholder farmers. In this case, we had green tea plantations and farms where we provide grants on a small scale, but enough for them to change their practices. So in terms of reduced fertilizer application, and also third-party monitoring of output. So it's really quite an interesting mechanism. And I'm just going to finish up here in the interest of time. But what we're looking at here is MBIs for ecosystem services are really complementary policy mechanisms, and eco-compensation is one type of complementary tool in this policy repertoire, if you will. So government finance MBIs, I mean, like in the Chinese context, it's probably more cost effective because it's got a large scale. But on the other hand, it's also limited because the government can't provide this type of funding for the foreseeable future. So there are now incentives to try to crowd in private sector involvement so that we can have additional leverage with the business community. And although it's increasing every year, the level of eco-compensation is still seen to be insufficient. But ADB is still supporting pilots. The potential for scaling up exists, but it has to be fit for purpose. It has to be with the right context. And the way that we're approaching it at the moment in our program is to try to identify pilots in a few different aspects of use of eco-compensation, including what's termed the gross ecosystem product, where we're starting to try to trial measuring the value of these green assets that contribute to the economic activity. And so there is a lot of potential, and we hope to report more as our program continues and we've got a bit more results to share. But at this time, I'd like to end here. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Shion, for sharing your experience. Your project is very innovative. Eco-compensation is one of the good practices of MBIs that we ADB have. I'm very proud of it. And there's a lot of lessons learned we can learn from the project. Thank you. Now, we have about 10 minutes or so. Let us move on to the Q&A and discussion session. We have already received several questions in the chat box. I understand that Lisa, you gave us the question. Thank you for a question for Professor Nam, and Professor Nam already answered. Very efficient as an economist. But I would like to, for the interactive discussion, to stimulate the interactive discussion, may I just invite both of you, Professor Nam and Lisa. Lisa, would you like to share your question and for Professor Nam to answer?
Sure. Well, maybe I can, since everybody's probably read it, maybe I can just ask for some more information. Like, can you tell us more about what you referred to as commitment and peer effects? Maybe just give more detail on that.
Okay, thank you. Commitment and peer effect is that, you know, the peer effects, something like social information. If you know that your peer group, for example, your neighborhood, consume that amount of water in a month, that is lower than your current water use.
Hello, Professor Nam.
So it's somehow like peer pressure, which is a good motivator, I think. I think people are very motivated by what people in their peer group do or say. I think studies have shown that has a big effect on people's behavior.
Good, thank you, Lisa. I'm afraid. Thank you for your follow-up. I'm afraid, Professor Nam, we lost Professor Nam for now. So let me go to another question, which was raised by Shin. I can read it, but Shin, would you like to join us to share your question to Ms. Jo?
Yes, thank you, Isao. So
Thank
nice
you.
to see you again. Yes, actually, I also just follow up because Ms. Jo already answered, but I have a follow-up question. So now that your Laguna Bay Authority, you can know the loading, the total loading instead of just concentration. Why don't you charge your fee directly on the loading of BOD by say kilogram instead of by concentration? Because that's exactly what happened also in China, in other countries. Usually it is easier to just test the concentration of discharge. So, and then the factories, they dilute, which waste a lot of water as well. But then the pollution contribution as a total load to the water body didn't reduce. So yeah, thank you.
So may I answer? So okay, based on the what I mentioned earlier, the variable fee is two-pronged. So 5 pesos for those complying industries and 30 pesos for those non-complying industries. So this gives an incentive for the industries to comply with the effluent standards, but at the same time maintain low BOD loading. So this differs the user fee system from what is being implemented by the DNR, because for DNR they only implement 5 pesos for its kilogram BOD, but in our case we the amount was based on a system that it's cheaper to put up waste treatment facility instead of paying the 30 pesos per kilogram that they discharge. So it's the system is based both on loading and compliance to effluent standards. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Ms. Jo. In order to get the total loading, you need to know the volume of in terms of cubic meter of the wastewater discharged. And this is not easy, especially many industries, they also not directly use tap water through the water meter. They can use well, they can draw water from river. So usually you get that by say water balance estimate or some coefficiency based on the production capacity. So it's not easy. And so I think that's why basically many countries discharge fees based on concentration. So I think that also reveal the difficulty or the conditions for MBI. There is a lot of work need to be, a lot of supporting effort and the measurement and all this in order for MBI to really work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your interaction, Ms. Jo and Shane. Thank you. Now we still have 5 minutes to conclude this webinar. If you have any other question, maybe we can accommodate one more question if you have. If not, I just like to conclude this webinar. But before that, if I may, I would like to invite all the speakers for just a brief, maybe a 30 seconds, 1 minute talk, if I may. But let me just summarize. Today's webinar presented the trends and opportunities for implementing MBIs for water quality and resources management. It was a great opportunity to discuss this recommendations for scaling up application with the good reference to good practices and case studies. We explore the needs, challenges, and opportunities for the reform and support through ADB's operations. That was a brief conclusion, but may I just invite our speakers. I'm afraid we lost Professor Nam, but we do have 3 panelists. May I invite each of you just to have a sort of final intervention from you, 30 seconds or 1 minute. Miss Jo, would you like to go first?
Okay, so let me thank ADB and Dr. Isao Endo for the opportunity to be part of this webinar and to share the experience of LLDA on the implementation of MBIs. But it was also an opportunity for me to learn from our resource persons and the other panelists, especially on their implementation of other MBIs in their areas. So we hope that we, through this, we can learn from each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jo. Mr. Long, would you like to share your last comment?
Yeah, it's very interesting discussion today because I learned a lot from our partner and panelists, especially for cases in China. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lorne. Xion.
Thanks, Isao, and thanks to everybody that attended today. Look, I think it's very important to share and continue to share our experiences across the different across the region. Certainly in East Asia, I mean, for the work that PRC is doing, one of the key issues for us is to really share and share the progress and the opportunities that in the case of China, for eco-compensation, but more broader policy interventions in the environment and water space can offer. We realize that there are going to be differing institutional arrangements, regulatory and policy differences, but I think the key principles remain the same. The challenges remain the same, and I think there are opportunities to continue to share this knowledge, which is a cornerstone for our work for China against the current country partnership strategy. So please reach out, and if there's any way that we can continue to share what we've been doing, and also to share and learn from the other countries in Southeast Asia, this will be something that we certainly welcome, and this is something that will be strongly supported through SDCC as well, and Isao's team and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Xion. Professor Nam, welcome back. Would you like to share your final comments in 30 seconds or so? Oops. Maybe I'm afraid there's a technical problem that the Professor Nam has. So I would like to, with the final comments from the panelists, 3 panelists, I would like to conclude this webinar. Thank you so much for your great presentation, intervention. I really appreciate it. I also thank the audience, the participants who spend your time to join this webinar, and your great questions and interactions. Thank you very much. With that, I would like to conclude this webinar. Thank you very much, and you have a good evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone. Thank you. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.